All right, everyone. Uh, Whoever the fuck ended up watching these, I really literally got one comment from doing this stuff. So this is chapter 10 in the fucking BABOK guide. I've been putting it off for a while, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Over the past 3 to 5 months, it is still an open window. I never closed it. It was an open window waiting for me to start doing this. And here I am. Today we do chapter 10, which is techniques. And as always, I'm just gonna fucking read through this shit. I'm gonna read it as I try to explain it to myself, and whatever I figure out, hopefully, works for anyone. Uh, Techniques chapter. There are 50 techniques that are recorded in this chapter, by the way. You can't see it, but here's technique number 10.10, which is collaborative games. Here's 10.25, which is interviews. Here's 10.22, which is sequence diagrams. There was something fascinating about basically just the science behind business analysis because it's really just human engagement and getting people to kind of interact with you. So let's take a step back and or a step forward, whatever. So techniques. The techniques chapter provides a high-level overview over the techniques referenced in the knowledge areas of the BABOK guide. Techniques are methods business analysts use to perform business analyst tasks. The techniques described in the BABOK guide are intended to cover the most common and widespread technique. Wow, 50 are still only the most common. Amazing. Practiced within the business analysis community, business analysts apply their experience and judgment in determining which techniques are appropriate to a given situation and how to apply each technique. This may include technique. Wait, okay, so business analysts apply their experience and judgment in determining which techniques are appropriate to a given situation. It makes sense. You get to decide what you're going to do. It doesn't mean we're going to use them all, right? This may include techniques that are not described in the BABOK guide as the practice of business analysis evolves. Techniques will be added, changed, and removed from the future iterations of the BABOK guide. Ooh, are you saying that there are things that kind of like probably we went anal nerd on them? I have no idea. In a number of cases, a set of conceptually similar approaches have been grouped into a single technique. Any approach within a technique may be used individually in a combination in accordance with technique's purpose. So basically, I feel right now what they do is they kind of like describe a technique, which is basically here acceptance and evaluation criteria. They kind of give us the purpose of it. They kind of give us a description of how it works, the elements, which are probably like, oh, okay, there's a lot more detail than I thought would be. And ultimately, usage considerations. So that's basically it. That's how we interact with techniques. What do you think, guys?
All right. So moving forward, we start with acceptance and evaluation criteria. Look at that. What's the purpose? Well, acceptance criteria are used to define the requirements, uh, outcomes or conditions that must be met in order for the solution to be considered acceptable to key stakeholders. Evaluation criteria are measures used to assess a set of requirements in order to choose between multiple solutions. So acceptance is basically like, what is okay, what makes what we're doing successful, an evaluation, like what are the things that we're going to be using to check whether that success is relevant or not. It kind of reminds me of what we've been doing the past 2 months in our startup, because effectively what we're doing is we're communicating back and forth in what is it we're trying to do, what makes it something that's, I don't know, like, we're used in school to get study and get good grades, but nobody says what a good grade, what reflects a good grade, what kind of understanding reflects a good grade. And so the thought behind it is literally just you are interacting with something. Uh, when will that be a good interaction? And what would be the good outcome? And like, how do you evaluate basically between? How do you basically decide what success would look like and what would some evaluation? And it was like, why success looking like that makes sense and how you measure it. So describing it, basically, acceptance and evaluation criteria define measures of value attributes to be used for assessing and comparing solutions and alternative designs. Super nerdy talk to Again, like maybe I love the color orange, and a client wants a color orange, while I want a color red, right? If I'm working for a client, we have to understand that he loves orange. Measurable and testable criteria allow for the objective and consistent assessment of solutions and designs. Exactly. So, like as much as we would like to believe is subjective. You always have to figure out a way to test the outcome, and the easier part to do that is to kind of like have it baked in, have objectivity baked in, and I think that's where people kind of like use data. It's a sad thing because then they kind of like, I don't know, experimentation kind of requires data to be created versus the other way around. So the simple thing is basically like, okay, we have a new feature on an app, and why would it make sense? When would we realize if the app makes sense? Well, if you take past KPIs when that feature didn't exist, that data would probably not support that feature existing. But with the new feature, for example, then ultimately the data that you have to collect data to kind of like, by the existence of the feature, by the testability of whatever it is you're building. You have to collect data relevant to that and see how it actually contributes to the overall goal. And the acceptance and evaluation criteria technique can apply at all levels of a project, from high level to more detailed level. That's absolutely true on every single thing, almost everything. Because all we have to do is kind of like, some things are just wasteful. Like the last thing you would want is to use a towel when you're underwater, right? But I feel like understanding that difference is the experience that you get out of like engaging. Anyways, acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria describes the minimum set of requirements that must be met in order for a particular solution to be worth implementing. They may be used to determine if a solution or solution component can meet the requirement. Uh, yeah, so like, do we have to keep going over and over about the fact that like, in order to consider the success, this and this and this and this need to be a thing. And basically, they may be used to determine if a solution or solution component can meet a requirement. Acceptance criteria are typically used when only one possible solution is being evaluated. Why one only possible solution? Because in a way, we're very opinionated. And, well, we can always test and ask ourselves questions at the end, like, okay, this is the solution that basically we think is a valid one. And by the end, we could always like reflect and get feedback from our action and interaction. Acceptance are typically used when only a possible solution being evaluated and generally expressed as a pass or fail. What? Evaluation criteria define the set of measurements which allow for ranking of solutions. Ranking of the solutions, or ranking of our approach to the solution, not ranking of the solutions. Oh. And alternative designs according to their value for stakeholders. Each evaluation criteria represents a continuous or discrete scale for measuring a specific solution attribute, such as cost, performance, usability, and how well the functionalities. Yeah, so like evaluation is a lot more around the KPI, and the evaluation needs to be communicated, right? Like it's not like it needs to be transparently communicated. But how well the functionality represents the stakeholder needs. Attributes that cannot be measured directly are evaluated using expert judgment or various scoring techniques. Attributes that can't be measured are probably subjective one or qualitative, right? Because somebody bought something for like $5, but they were very happy, and like for the next like 5 6 weeks. It's a restaurant thing, by the way. Strategically, what restaurants do, or the smarter restaurants, what they do is they don't market and promote themselves, but they kind of give the customers that come to the restaurants kind of like better service, so the customers look forward to come back. Almost every single time a customer goes somewhere to a restaurant, they kind of come back with other people. So yeah, both evaluation and acceptance criteria may be defined with the same value attributes. When evaluating various solutions, the solutions with lower costs and better performances may be rated higher. Yeah. we get to also decide like on what solutions are better and for what reason. If you're thinking quantity, then you probably have to look at speed and just smoke at speed and basically cost and all that stuff. If you're thinking quality, you probably have to look at something that contributes to value. So you're paying somewhere, you're kind of like you're paying for something somewhere, or you're kind of like no compromising one thing for another. Anywho, uh, when accepting a solution, the criteria are written using minimum performance requirements and maximum cost limits in contractual agreements and user acceptance tests. That's true. Value attributes are the characteristics of a solution that determine or substantially influence its value for stakeholders. They represent a meaningful and agreed upon decomposition of the value proposition into its constituent parts. I haven't read documentation like this in a while. Value attributes are the characteristics of a solution that determine or substantially influence its value for stakeholders. Yeah, هم يمكن man. Again, like uh, they represent a meaningful and agreed upon decomposition of the value proposition into its constituent parts. The attributes of value, because chances are your client cannot explain exactly what they want, or else they would have figured it out. But they can tell you what things they find value, what are the things they support, sponsor, and all that kind of stuff, which can be described as qualities of the solution should either possess or avoid. Examples of a value attributes. Ability to provide specific information. Maybe we're testing something because we want X speed run. Ability to perform or support specific operations. Performance and responsiveness characteristics. Applicability of the solution in specific situations and contexts. Availability of specific features and capabilities. Usability, security, scalability, and reliability. All of these are kind of like solution-based values, right? Like these are values you get from a solution. This is change. These solutions contribute to change, something like this. Basing acceptance and evaluation criteria on value attributes ensures that they are valid and relevant to stakeholder needs and should be considered when accepting and evaluating the solution. Like yeah, like a financial problem solution kind of has different values than a sales solution or an operations solution. And it should be considered when accepting and evaluating the solution. Business analysts ensure that the definition of all value attributes are agreed upon by all stakeholders. Business analysts may design tools and instructions for performing the assessment as well as for recording the process and processing the results. Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of like us taking notes. Really, like a business analyst is only there for the brain power. Here, basically, we figure out what's the acceptance criteria, the cost, the performance, usability, the functionality. And then we define the requirements for it. And then after that, we kind of like test and see like if it works or not. Here, we're testing. It seems to be we're testing with requirements, with the actual like we're not testing the product. We're testing if the people accept a solution like that. The people we're working with accept us working on such a solution. Again, now the other one seems like multiple solutions, evaluation criteria, define measures, and basically measure. Kind of straight to the point, right? The same values that are applied for acceptance criteria could be applied for the evaluation criteria. Because ultimately, you cannot evaluate with different values than you would when you're kind of like picking your standards. Because you're creating it. Really, business analysis is a lot more like fixing a piece of the system, kind of like analyzing a part of the cog of the system that's not really working. Assessment. In order to assess a solution against acceptance or evaluation criteria, it must be constructed in a measurable format, right? Objective, KPIs. Testability. Acceptance criteria are expressed in a testable form. And this may require breaking requirements down into an atomic form. That should always be the case, by the way. because whenever you're approaching something, you should always attempt it with a first principles approach. Like, when you take the requirements, for example, we're using this example here. When you take the requirements and you're fully just breaking them down to in their atomic form, what you're doing is you give yourself the chance in your own way to rearrange the information, right? To rearrange the basics of this information, the basic like relationships that people kind of like have with those things. It's like Steve Jobs always used to say it, like, he used to ask people like, why do you do it this way? And they go like, it's always been done this way. It's like, but why? So like they kind of like dive deeper into like, the reasoning, maybe the reasoning of history and how it can change or adapt, or just kind of like, whatever it is they're doing and how they would that would it would work for them, right? And last thing you want is to kind of like have a certain structure that doesn't work for you. Well, this may require breaking requirements, right? Acceptance criteria are presented in the form of statements which can be verified as true or false. This is often achieved through user acceptance testing. Uh, like, maybe the first stages of testing is just having people tell you if they're down with it or not. Ultimately, if whoever you're working for is the person who's going to say, yeah, let's move on or not. Evaluation criteria provide a way to deter measures. We're talking about measures now. If features provide the value necessary to satisfy stakeholders' needs, the criteria are presented as parameters that can be measured against a continuous or discrete scale. The definition of each criterion allows the solution to be measured through various methods, such as benchmarking or expert judgment. Defining evaluation criteria may involve designing tools and instructions for performing the assessment, as well as for recording and processing its results. So, so you have to do measurements for your test, and you have to do measurements for the actual like end results and basically performance. So you're kind of like trying to measure the quality behind what you're doing, the protocols behind it, or basically the processes behind it. And last thing you're doing is kind of like measuring whether the output matters or not, or creating a measurement for how the output matters or not. Correct? Defining evaluation criteria may involve designing tools and instructions for performing the assessment as well as for recording and processing its results. Fuck yeah. And usage consideration strength. Okay, so in considerations, agile methodologies may require that all requirements be expressed in the form of testable acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria are necessary when the requirements express contractual obligations. Acceptance criteria provide the ability to assess requirements based on agreed upon criteria. Evaluation criteria provide the ability to assess diverse needs based on agreed upon criteria, such as features, common indicators, local or global benchmarks. So I'm sure we're going to have to use things like, okay, the strengths of uh, of acceptance criteria basically is uh, they're necessary for contractual obligations. They they'll have us kind of like dive deeper and know how to test with everything, which allows basically for a more solid product, right? Or more solid solution. It provides the ability to assess requirements based on agreed upon criteria. So basically, we don't build something that's not necessarily going to be needed. The last thing you want is a disgruntled client. Allows for strong documentation, allows for people to kind of like know what they're agreeing to, and allows for a lot of communication in between. Evaluation criteria assist in the delivery of expected return on investment. Exactly, because then while you're actually like evaluating, what you're doing is you're kind of like testing things left and right and creating the systematized approach to the solution. So you're gonna have a strong power, strong position in creating assumptions onto costs and like expectations and strategizing and planning. Uh, that helps in defining priorities as well, exactly. And the limitations, the acceptance criteria may express contractual obligations and such, may be difficult to change for legal or what's it called purposes. Uh, it's so anal to a point where you might get yourself screwed. Achieving agreement on evaluation criteria for different needs among diverse stakeholders can be challenging. Yeah, it's all the whole thing is communication back and forth. So uh, everything we just read, acceptance criteria and evaluation, is literally you only preparing to do the job. And so this is it. 10.2 coming up next.